Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and there was water covering the earth. On day 1, he also created light. Then he separated the light from the darkness and called it day, and the darkness he called night. On day 2, God took the water and divided it. He placed water in the firmament above and called it heaven, or as we call it, the sky. On day 3, God created the dry land, which he called earth. He also gathered together the waters left on the earth and called them seas. Then he created all the plants, herbs, grass, trees, and seeds. On day 4, he created the sun and the moon and the stars. On day 5, he filled the water with aquatic animals like fish and whales. He also created all the birds and animals that fly in the sky. And on day 6, he created land animals and humans. Then on day 7, he rested. In Genesis 2, we read how God formed man out of the dust, breathed life into him, and named him Adam. God took Adam and put him in the Garden of Eden and told him to take care of it. He also told him he could eat fruit off of any of the trees except for one. He was not to eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or he would die. In verse 18, God said, "It's not good that man should be alone. I will make an helpmeet for him." So God formed all the animals out of the ground and brought them to Adam to see what he would name them. But even after Adam named all the cattle and all the birds and beasts, there was no one there who was fit to be a helpmeet for him. Then God caused Adam to fall asleep. He took one of his ribs and he formed a woman out of that rib. And when Adam woke up and saw her, he said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." And both Adam and his wife were naked, but they weren't ashamed. So Adam and his wife lived in the Garden of Eden. But there was also a serpent in that garden, and that serpent was more sly and cunning than any of the beasts which God had created. He went to the woman, and he tempted her to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He wanted her to take a bite of the fruit. He told her, "You won't die. Your eyes will be opened, and you will be as God, knowing good and evil." And Adam's wife, she listened. She ate of the fruit, then she gave it to her husband, and he ate it too. And when they ate the fruit, their eyes were opened, and they noticed they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together, and they covered themselves. Later, when they heard God's voice in the garden, they hid from him. He called to them, and when he questioned them, they revealed they had eaten the forbidden fruit, and the serpent had tempted the woman to do so. As a result, God cursed the serpent to crawl on his belly for the rest of the days of his life, among other curses. Then he told the woman, "I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." And to Adam he said, "Cursed is the ground for your sake. It will bring forth thorns and thistles. You will live by the sweat of your brow, and one day you will return to the dust." In verse 20 we read, "And Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living." Right after this, God clothes Adam and Eve in coats of skin and kicks them out of the garden, so they will never eat from the tree of life and live forever. Then he places cherubims at the east of the garden and a flaming sword, so they, Adam and Eve, can never go back. Genesis chapter 4. After Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, Adam knew his wife, and she gave birth to a baby boy who she named Cain. Later on, she gave birth to Abel. Abel grew up, and he became a shepherd, while Cain became a tiller of the ground. One day, Cain brought an offering of fruit and vegetables to the Lord, and Abel offered the firstborn lambs from his flock. God was pleased with Abel's lambs, and he accepted his offering, but he didn't accept or have respect for Cain's. Because of this, Cain grew angry, and his countenance fell. And the Lord asked him, "Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, won't you be accepted?" But if you don't do well, sin lies at your door. It wants to overpower you, but you need to subdue it and master it. But Cain didn't listen. One day when he was in the field with his brother, he rose up against Abel and he killed him. And the Lord asked him, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And Cain said, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And God said, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you till the land, it will not yield its fruit to you. You will be a fugitive and a vagabond on earth." And Cain said, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. You have driven me out, and one day everyone that finds me will kill me." So God placed a mark on Cain and declared that anyone who killed him would be cursed sevenfold. Then Cain left the presence of the Lord, and he moved to the land of Nod. There he married, and he had a son named Enoch. And Cain built and named a city after his son Enoch. And Enoch, he had a son named Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael became the father of Methushael, and Methushael became the father of Lamech. And Lamech was the first man to our knowledge to marry two women. His wives' names were Ada and Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal, who was the first man to raise livestock and live in tents. His brother's name was Jubal, and Jubal was the first who played the harp and flute. Lamech's other wife, Zillah, gave birth to a son named Tubal-Cain. He became an expert in forging tools of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain also had a sister named Naamah. In verse 23, Lamech said to his wives that he had killed a man who had attacked and wounded him. And if Cain should be avenged sevenfold, he said, truly I, Lamech, will be avenged 70 and sevenfold. After the death of Abel, Adam knew his wife, and she gave birth to another son who she named Seth. And when Seth grew up, he had a son named Enos. And this is the time people first began to worship the Lord by name. In Genesis chapter 5, we read of the generations of Adam and how long they lived and when they had their children. In fact, Adam lived to be 930 years old. Adam was the father of Seth, who was the father of Enosh, who was the father of Canaan, who was the father of Mahalalel, who was the father of Jared, who was the father of Enoch, who was the father of Methuselah, who was the father of Lamech, who was the father of Noah. And the reason that Enoch only lived to be 365 years is because he walked with God and God took him. Noah, his great-great-grandson, was 500 years old when he fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In Genesis 6, the sons of God married the daughters of men because they were so attractive, and they had children that became mighty men. They were also giants in the earth. At this point, God saw mankind was extremely wicked and that every imagination of his heart was only evil, constantly. And so God said, I will destroy man from the face of the earth, along with the animals, the insects, and birds of the air, for I regret ever making them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord because he was righteous. So the Lord told Noah that he was going to destroy the whole earth with a flood and everything in it. Then he told Noah to build an ark according to his instructions and to take 2 of each animal, male and female, onto the boat, along with enough food to feed them. He was also to take 7 pairs of all the clean animals and 7 pairs of all the birds. And Noah, he did everything that God commanded him to. Finally, after building the boat, 7 days before the flood, Noah, his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives entered the ark with all the animals, and the Lord shut the door. 7 days later, when Noah was 600 years old, God's promised flood happened. The waters of the deep broke forth, the heavens let loose in a torrential downpour, and it rained 40 days and 40 nights till water covered the whole face of the earth, and it rose and rose until it reached 22 feet above the highest mountain peak. Everything, all the people and animals and birds and beasts that were not on the ark, died, and the waters covered the face of the earth for 150 days. Finally, God remembered Noah and caused a wind to blow across the earth and the waters to recede. On the 17th day of the 7th month, 5 months after the rain began, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. 2.5 months later, as the waters continued to recede, other mountain peaks finally became visible. Then 40 days later, Noah released a raven to look for dry land. But the raven didn't come back. He just kept on flying back and forth till the dry land finally appeared. So Noah sent out a dove also. But the dove couldn't find any land, so it came back. 7 days later, Noah sent the same dove out again, and the bird returned with an olive leaf in her beak. Once more, 7 days later, Noah sent the dove out yet again, and this time it didn't come back. By now, Noah was 601 years old, and several months after the dove had flown away, God finally spoke to him and told Noah to leave the boat along with all of his family and all the animals and to go out and repopulate the world. So approximately 370 days after the beginning of the flood, Noah finally stepped onto dry land. There he built an altar and took a pair of all the clean animals and made a sacrifice to the Lord. In Genesis 8, verse 21, the Lord smelled the sweet fragrance of Noah's offering, and he said in his heart, I will not curse the ground any more for man's sake, even though the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night will not cease. Genesis chapter 9. After Noah and his family left the ark, God told them, be fruitful and multiply. He also told them that the animals, birds, and fish of the sea would fear them, and they could eat freely from any of the animals. But he warned them, you must never eat any meat that still has the lifeblood in it. Then God made a covenant with Noah and his family and promised that he would never again destroy the whole earth with a flood. As a sign of his covenant, he placed a beautiful rainbow in the sky. As time went on, Noah tilled the land and planted a vineyard. From his grapes, he made wine. One day, Noah drank the wine until he became drunk and was uncovered inside his tent, which means he wasn't wearing any clothes. Ham, his youngest son, came along and peered into the tent and saw his father's indecent state. Instead of covering him, he ran off to tell his brothers the juicy news. However, when Shem and Japheth heard this, they took a robe and carefully walked backward into their father's tent without turning their heads to avoid accidentally seeing anything, and they covered up their father. Later on, after Noah woke up, he heard what Ham had done, and he cursed him. Cursed be Canaan, he will be the lowest of servants to his brethren, but blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan will be his servant. God will expand Japheth's territory, and he will share the prosperity of Shem, and Canaan will be his servant. After this, the Bible says that Noah lived for 350 years after the flood, and finally, at the age of 950 years old, he finally passes away. In Genesis 10, we read about the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, including the names of their sons and grandsons. Among the notable offspring was Nimrod, the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham. Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. In fact, he was so famous, people would say, this man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world. As time went on, all the descendants of Noah journeyed to the east and settled on a plain in the land of Shinar. There they had a brilliant idea. Let's make bricks, they said, and harden them with fire. Come, let's build a city and a tower whose top will reach into the heavens, and let us make a famous name for ourselves, so we won't be scattered across the earth. So the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the descendants of Noah were building. Behold, he said, the people are united and all speak the same language. After this, nothing they imagine to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language. Then they won't be able to understand each other when they speak." And that is what the Lord did. He confused their languages so they couldn't understand one another anymore. In their confusion and mayhem, the people scattered across the whole face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. That's why we call the city of Babel, because Babel means a confused noise made by a number of voices. From one of those groups of people that scattered, we read a long genealogy that leads to the birth of Abram, whom we know today as Abraham. Abram was a descendant of Shem, and Abram's father was a man named Terah. Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran had a son named Lot, but Haran died before his father Terah. When Abram and Nahor grew up, they got married. Abram married Sarai, his half-sister, while Nahor married Milcah, the daughter of his brother Haran. However, Sarai was barren. She had no children. After a while, Terah took his whole family, including Abram and Sarai, and left Ur of the Chaldees. He headed towards Canaan, but stopped in a place called Haran, which was about 550 miles northwest of Ur, and settled there. Terah lived 205 years altogether, and he died in Haran. In Genesis chapter 12, the Lord tells Abram, "Leave your country and your relatives and go to the land I show you, and I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make your name famous. I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you, and through you all families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram obeyed and left his home in Haran behind at the age of 75, accompanied by Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his nephew, along with all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people in his household. They headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived, Abram set up camp at a place called Shechem beside the oak of Moreh. There the Lord appeared to Abram and promised him, "I will give this land to your descendants." Afterwards, Abram traveled to several more locations until a famine struck the land, so he decided to go down into Egypt. But before they entered Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, "Listen, I know that you are a beautiful woman, so when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and then they will kill me so they can have you. Please tell them you are my sister, so they will spare my life and treat me well." And sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed how beautiful Sarai was. In fact, when the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, and Sarai was taken into his palace for the purpose of marriage. Then Pharaoh gave Abram lots of gifts because of her: camels, donkeys, cattle, goats, sheep, and male and female servants. But the Lord was not pleased. He sent terrible plagues on Pharaoh and his whole household because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh, he summoned Abram and said to him angrily, "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so I might have taken her to me as wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and get out." Then Pharaoh commanded his men to escort Abram, along with his wife and all his possessions, out of the country of Egypt. Genesis chapter 13. After Abram was kicked out of Egypt, he traveled north into the Negev and pitched his tents between Bethel and Ai. And Abram was very rich. He had lots of cattle, sheep, goats, and tents. But his nephew Lot also had a lot of flocks and cattle, and the land couldn't support all of their animals. There wasn't enough grass, so Lot's and Abram's herdsmen ended up constantly bickering and arguing. Finally, Abram talked to his nephew Lot and said to him, "Let's not have any more strife between us and between our herdsmen, for we are brethren. Look, the whole land is before us. Choose wherever you want to go and separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right, or if you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot took a good look, and he saw that the plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar were green and lush and beautiful. The plains were well watered and fertile like the gardens of Eden, and this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose all the plain of Jordan and traveled east. There he settled next to the city of Sodom and camped among the cities in the valley. But the men of Sodom were extremely wicked and were constantly sinning against God. Meanwhile, Abram stayed in the land of Canaan. After Lot left, the Lord said to Abram, "Lift up your eyes and look all around you, as far as your eyes can see. I will give this land to you and to your offspring forever, and I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, to where man cannot count them. Arise, walk through the land, for I will give it to you." Then Abram took his tent, and he moved to the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built an altar to the Lord. In Genesis chapter 14, war broke out in the area. The kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, also called Zoar, rebelled and fought against King Chedorlaomer of Elam, along with 4 other kings. It was 4 kings against 5, and they faced off against each other in the valley of the Dead Sea. But the valley was filled with tar pits. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, along with their armies, fled in defeat, some of them fell into the tar pits, while the others escaped into the mountains. Then the victors plundered the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. They took all the spoils of war, the gold, the precious items, the food, the people, and headed home. And they also took Lot, Abram's nephew, with all of his possessions. One of the men escaped and told Abram what had happened to his nephew. So Abram girded up for battle. He took his 318 trained servants who had been born into his household and headed out to rescue Lot, along with some of his allies. He chased after Chedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them at a place called Dan. There Abram divided his men and ambushed the enemy during the night. Chedorlaomer's army fled for their lives, but Abram chased them and recovered everything that had been taken, including his nephew Lot with all his possessions, and the women and captives and goods from the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. As Abram returned in victory, the king of Sodom went out to meet him, along with another king named Melchizedek, king of Salem, who brought bread and wine. The Bible says Melchizedek was the priest of the Most High God, and Abram gave him a tithe of everything he had just taken. In fact, to our knowledge, this is the first time anybody gave a tithe in the Bible. Melchizedek, king of Salem, blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered your enemies into your hand." Afterwards, the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Just give me back my people and keep the goods for yourself." But Abram said, "I have made a promise to God that I will not take anything from you, not even a thread or a shoe latchet, lest you say, 'I'm the reason Abram is rich.' I will only accept what my warriors have eaten, and I ask that you give a portion to my allies." After these things, God spoke to Abram in a vision in Genesis chapter 15 and said, "Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield, and thy exceeding great reward." But Abram said, "Lord, what will you give me, seeing as I have no children, and everything I have will go to the steward of my house, Eliezer of Damascus? Behold, you've given me no offspring." The Lord replied, "Your servant will not be your heir, but you will have a son of your own body, and he will be your heir." Then he brought Abram out of his tent and into the night. "Look toward heaven," he said, "and count the stars if you are able to. As numerous as the stars above, so shall your offspring be." And Abram, in spite of all the obstacles and his age, he believed in the Lord. So because of his faith, God counted him as righteous. The Lord also told him that he would give the surrounding land to Abram, and he would inherit it. "Lord, what proof do I have that I will inherit it?" Abraham responded. Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. So Abram did as the Lord instructed him. He gathered those animals, divided them in half, except for the birds, laid them next to each other, and drove away the vultures that tried to eat them. As the sun went down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a great darkness fell upon him. And the Lord said unto Abram, Know for sure that your seed will be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will punish that nation, and your offspring will come out with great possessions. As for you, you will die in peace and go to your fathers, and be buried in a good old age. After 4 generations, your descendants will come back here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. After these words, in the pitch blackness of the night, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp passed between the pieces of animals. And the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto your seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaim, the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. All of it shall be yours. In Genesis chapter 16, Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, which means he was 85 years old. But after all this time, Sarai still hadn't borne him any children, so she came up with an idea. She had a handmaid, an Egyptian whose name was Hagar, and Sarai said to Abram, Look, the Lord has prevented me from having children, so go in to my maid. Maybe I can have children through her. And Abram listened to his wife Sarai. He married Hagar, slept with her, and she conceived. And when Hagar saw that she was pregnant, she despised her mistress and treated her with contempt. This made Sarai very angry. She went to her husband and said, My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid to you, and now that she's pregnant, she despises and treats me with disrespect. The Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said, Look, she is your maid. Deal with her as you must. So Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, and Hagar ran away. And the angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water in the wilderness, along the road to Shur, which led back to Egypt. And the angel asked her, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where did you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai. Return to her, the angel said, and submit to her authority. I will multiply your descendants, so one day they will be too many to count. The child in your womb is a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears, because the Lord has heard your affliction. And your son will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he will live in defiance against his brethren. Afterwards, Hagar referred to the Lord as the God who sees me, and she named the well Bir Lahai Roi, which means well of the living one who sees me. Then Hagar returned and gave birth to a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Genesis chapter 17. When Abram turned 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, Walk before me, and be perfect, and I will make my covenant between you and me. You will be a father of many nations, and no longer will your name be Abram, but Abraham, for I will make you extremely fruitful, to where nations and kings come from your offspring. And as I've said before, I will give you and your descendants this land for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed. And this is the terms of my covenant, that you and your offspring must keep. Every man and male child among you, from generation to generation, must be circumcised, or they will be cut off from me for breaking the covenant. As for Sarai, thy wife, you are not to call her Sarai any longer, but Sarah, for I will bless her, and give you a son from her. Yes, I will bless her, and she will be a mother of nations, and kings will be among her offspring. When Abraham heard this, he fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, "How can I father a child at 100 years old, and Sarah have a child at 90? Oh, that Ishmael might live before you," Abraham said to God. But God replied, "Sarah your wife will indeed bear you a son, and you will call his name Isaac, which means laughter, and I will establish my covenant with him and his seed forever. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Look, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. He will become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant will be with Isaac, which Sarah will give birth to around this time next year." Then God finished speaking and left. Then, in obedience to God's command, Abraham took Ishmael, his 13-year-old son, and all the men in his household, and circumcised them. In Genesis chapter 18, the Lord appeared again to Abraham in the plains of Mamre. Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent under the hot midday sun, when he looked up and noticed 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he ran to greet them and bowed before the men. "My Lord," he said, "if I have found favor in your sight, stay with me, and let me fetch you some water and wash your feet as you rest under the tree, and I'll also get you some food before you continue on your journey." And they replied, "Go ahead, do as you have said." So Abraham ran into the tent and told Sarah, "Hurry, take your best flour and make 3 portions of bread." Then he ran into the herd, fetched a calf, and gave it to a young man to butcher and cook it. Finally, Abraham took butter, milk, and the freshly cooked beef and set it before his guests. As they ate the meal, they asked him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And Abraham said, "She's in the tent." "I will come back around this time next year," the man said, "and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Abraham and Sarah were very old, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of woman. And Sarah, who was in the tent, overheard what the man said, and she laughed silently. "How can an old woman like me enjoy such a pleasure, especially when my husband is also so old?" she thought to herself. And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Will I really give birth when I'm so old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? As I have said, I will return according to the time of life, and Sarah will have a son." When Sarah heard him, though, she denied it. "I didn't laugh," she said, because she was afraid. "No," he said, "but you did laugh." Afterwards, the 3 men got up and gazed towards the city of Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on their way. As they were walking, the Lord said, "Should I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing he will surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed in him? For I know him, that he will command his children and his household to keep the way of the Lord, to do what is right and just, so that the Lord may do everything he has promised to Abraham." So the Lord said to Abraham, "I've heard a great outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, because their sin is so grievous. Today I'm headed down to see if they are as wicked as I have heard, and if not, I will know." At these words, the other 2 men, who were actually angels, headed down towards the city of Sodom. But Abraham stood in front of the Lord and said, "Will you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you also destroy them? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked. Shouldn't the judge of all the earth do right?" And the Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous in the city of Sodom, then I will spare it for their sakes." Then Abraham answered and said, "Since I've started, let me speak further, though I am but dust and ashes. What if there are only 45? Then I will not destroy it. Suppose there's only 40? Then I will not do it for 40's sake." "Please don't be angry with me, my Lord," Abraham said. "What if there are only 30? And the Lord replied, "I will not do it if I find 30. Since I've already started speaking to you, my Lord, I ask, suppose there are only 20? I will not destroy it for 20's sake. One last time Abraham said, "Oh Lord, don't be angry with me, and I will speak only this once more. Suppose you only find 10. And the Lord answered, I will not destroy it for the 10's sake. And with that, the Lord left, and Abraham returned to his tent. In Genesis chapter 19, the two angels arrived at the city of Sodom late in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate when he saw the two men. He rushed to his feet, ran to greet them, and bowed down to the ground. "My lords," he said, "come with me to my house. Wash your feet and stay there for the night. Then you can rise up early in the morning and go on your way." But the men replied, "No, we'll stay in the street tonight." But Lot strongly insisted, so they finally listened and went to his home. And Lot made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they all ate together. But before they went to sleep, the men of the city of Sodom surrounded the house, both young and old, from every part of the city. And they shouted to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so we may know them." So Lot went outside and closed the door behind him. "Listen, my brothers," he said, "please don't do something so wicked. Here, I have 2 daughters, which haven't known men. I will bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you please. Only don't touch my guests, for they are under my roof, my protection." "Get out of the way!" they yelled at him. "You came to stay here, and now you think you can act like our judge? Now we'll treat you even worse than those men." Then they rushed forward and violently pushed against Lot to where they almost broke the door. But the 2 men who were angels opened the door, grabbed Lot, pulled him into the house, and slammed the door shut. Then they struck the men of Sodom with blindness, both young and old, so the men grew weary of trying to find the door. Inside the house, the angel said to Lot, "Do you have any relatives living here besides you? Son-in-laws, sons, daughters? If you do, you must get them out of this place quickly, for the cry against this place has grown so great that the Lord has sent us to destroy this city." So Lot ran to tell his daughter's fiancés. "Quick," he told them, "get out of this place. The Lord's going to destroy it." But the young men thought he was only mocking and joking with them. Finally, when the morning dawned, the angels pushed Lot to get out. "Get up," they urged. "Take your wife, your 2 daughters, and leave right now, or you will be destroyed along with the city." But Lot hesitated. Then the 2 men grabbed his hand, the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, because of the Lord's great mercy, and dragged them to safety outside of the city. "Now go," they said. "Run, escape for your life. Don't look behind you, and don't stay anywhere in the valley. Escape into the mountains, or you will be consumed." But Lot protested, "Oh no, not into the mountains, my lords. Please, listen, you have shown great mercy and kindness to me by saving my life, but I can't escape to the mountains, because some disaster will surely happen to me, and I'll be killed. Look, there's a small village near here, and it's a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not little? And my soul will live." And the angel said, "All right, I will do as you have requested, and not destroy the place you've mentioned. Now hurry up and escape, for we can do nothing until you get there." After this, the village was named Zoar, which means little place. Lot reached Zoar just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire from the heavens down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. He destroyed those cities and all the cities of the valley, along with their inhabitants and everything that grew on the ground. But even as God destroyed all the cities of the plains, he remembered Abraham and rescued Lot. For Lot was a righteous man who was tormented and grieved because of the wickedness constantly surrounding him. But Lot's wife, she looked back at the city of Sodom, even though the angels had said not to, and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham rose up and went to the place where he had stood and talked with the Lord. And he looked out toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward the valley. And he saw pillars of smoke billowing out of the land like smoke from a furnace. But not long after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot left the village of Zoar and fled to the mountains with his 2 daughters because he was afraid for his life. And he ended up living in a cave alone with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn daughter said to her sister, "Our father is old, and there's no men left in the area to marry. Come, let's get our father drunk with wine, and we'll lie with him so we can preserve our family line." And that's what they did. They made their father drink wine that night till he was drunk, and the firstborn went in and laid with her father, and he didn't have a clue about it. On the next day, the younger sister did the same thing, and again Lot was so drunk he didn't know when she lay down or when she got up. As a result, both of the daughters of Lot became pregnant. The eldest sister gave birth to a boy and named him Moab. He became the father of the Moabites. And the younger sister also gave birth to a boy who she named Ben-Ami. And Ben-Ami became the father of the Ammonites. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham traveled toward the south country and stayed between Kadesh and Shur, and then moved to the nation of Gerar. When they arrived there, Abraham told everyone Sarah was his sister, just like he had done in Egypt. And this time, Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah into his palace. But God came to King Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man, for the woman you have taken is another man's wife." But Abimelech had not slept with Sarah, and he said, "Lord, will you slay a righteous people? Didn't he say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she, even she herself said, 'He is my brother.' In the integrity of my heart and the innocency of my hands have I done this." And God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know you are innocent. That's why I stopped you from sinning against me, for I prevented you from touching her. Now give Sarah back to her husband, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you don't give her back, know this, you will surely die, you and all your people." That very day, Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all of his servants and told them everything the Lord had told him in his dream. And the men were terrified. Then King Abimelech called for Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And what have I done to offend you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom such a great sin? You have done things to me that should never have been done. What did you see that caused you to do such a thing?" And Abraham said, "Because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me for my wife's sake. And yet I did speak truthfully. She is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not my mother, and I married her. And when we started to travel, I told her, 'Please show me this kindness. Wherever we go, tell them that I am your brother.'" After this, Abimelech took sheep, oxen, men servants, and women servants, and gave them to Abraham, and returned Sarah to him. And King Abimelech said, "Now see, my land is before you. Live wherever you want." Then he turned to Sarah and said, "Look, I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver to compensate you for all that has happened, and to vindicate your honor." So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and all his maidservants so they could have children once again, for the Lord had closed up their wombs because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Genesis chapter 21. The Lord visited Sarah and kept his promise to her, for Sarah became pregnant, and she gave birth to a baby boy at 90, which means Abraham finally had a son by Sarah at 100 years old, exactly as God said it would happen. Abraham named his son Isaac, which means laughter. Then he circumcised him at 8 days old, as God had commanded. And Sarah said, "God has made me to laugh, so that all that hear the good news will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that I, Sarah, would ever nurse a child? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." Time passed, and little Isaac grew up, and on the day he was weaned, Abraham threw a great feast. But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Hagar, mocking little Isaac. So she went to Abraham in a rage and said, "Throw this bondwoman out and her son. Get rid of them, for I refuse to have that boy share the inheritance with Isaac." This made Abraham extremely upset, and he was greatly distressed because of Ishmael. But God said to him, "Don't be so distressed over Ishmael and Hagar. Go ahead and do as Sarah has said, for your descendants will come through Isaac, and I will also make a nation from Ishmael, because he is your son." So Abraham got up early in the morning, took some bread and a bottle of water, and gave it to Hagar. He put the supplies on her shoulder and sent Hagar and her child away. So Hagar left with Ishmael and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Eventually, the two of them ran out of water, and Hagar placed Ishmael under one of the shrubs. Then she walked several dozen feet away till she could no longer see him and sat down. "I don't want to see my son die," she said, bursting out into tears. God heard Ishmael crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid, for God has heard your son's cry. Get up, help the boy to his feet, and hold his hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and Hagar saw a well of water. She went to the well, filled the bottle with water, and gave Ishmael a drink. And as the boy grew, God was with him. Ishmael lived in the wilderness of Paran and became an archer, and his mother Hagar took a wife for him from Egypt. Around that time, King Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, came and talked with Abraham. "God is clearly with you in all that you do," the king said. "Now promise to me, by God, that you will not deceive me or my son or son's son, but that you will treat us with the same kindness that I have treated you with as you have stayed in my land." And Abraham said, "I promise." But then Abraham complained to King Abimelech because the king's servants had violently taken away one of Abraham's wells of water. And the king replied, "I don't know who did such a thing. You've never told me this before, and I haven't heard about it till today." So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. Then Abraham took 7 female lambs and separated them from the flock. "What do you mean by separating these lambs?" King Abimelech asked. "They are for you," Abraham replied. "They will serve as a witness between us that I have dug this well." Then Abraham named the place Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because the two of them made an oath there. Afterwards, King Abimelech and Phicol, his commanding officer, returned to the land of the Philistines. So Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time, and there he planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba and called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Now after these things, God tested Abraham's faith and said to him in Genesis chapter 22, "Abraham." And Abraham said, "Here I am." "Take your son," God said, "your only son Isaac, whom you love, and travel to the land of Moriah. There offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will show you." So Abraham rose up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, along with Isaac his son. He chopped up wood for the burnt offering, then left towards the land of Moriah. 3 days later, Abraham saw the place in the distance. "Stay here with the donkey," he told the 2 servants, "and my son and I will go further and worship God. Then we will return." Then Abraham took the wood and had Isaac carry it, while he took the fire and a knife, and they headed off together. "My father?" Isaac asked. "Yes, son," Abraham replied. "We have fire and wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" "My son, God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering." After traveling for a while, they arrived at the place God had told him about, and Abraham built an altar there and placed wood on it. Then he tied up Isaac, his precious son, and laid him on the altar. Then grabbing his knife, he lifted it up to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord suddenly called out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham," he said. "Here am I," Abraham replied. "Do not lay your hand upon the boy, and do nothing to hurt him, For now I know you truly fear God, seeing as you have not held back your son, your only son, from me." Suddenly Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. So he took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. Then the angel of the Lord spoke a second time and said, "I have sworn by myself, says the Lord, that because you have done this thing and not kept back your son, your only son, that I will indeed bless you and multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand on the seashore, and your seed will conquer his enemies. Through your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have heard and obeyed my voice." With these promises ringing in his ears, Abraham returned unto his young men, and together they returned to Beersheba, where Abraham continued to live. After these things, someone told Abraham that Milcah, Nahor's wife, had given birth to 8 sons, among whom was which a boy named Bethuel. And Bethuel was now the father of a girl named Rebekah, who we will hear more about later. And Nahor also had a concubine named Reumah, who gave him 4 more sons. In Genesis chapter 23, Sarah died at 127 years old, which means Isaac was 37 when she passed away. She died in a place called Kirjath-arba, now known as Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham wept over her. Then leaving her side, he went to the Hittite elders and asked, "I'm a stranger and a foreigner among you. Please, I ask that you sell me a place to bury my dead." The Hittites answered, "Listen, my lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Go ahead and bury your dead in the best of our tombs. None of us will deny you or hinder you from burying your wife." Abraham bowed before them and then asked if he could buy the cave of Machpelah from Ephron, the son of Zohar, for as much money as it was worth. And Ephron tried to give it to him for free, but Abraham insisted on paying him. Then Ephron told him it was worth 400 shekels of silver, and Abraham paid him the full amount. So before all the elders of the Hittites, Abraham officially bought the field of Ephron, which was located in Machpelah to the east of Mamre. He also bought the cave that was located in the field, along with all the surrounding trees. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave located in the field of Machpelah in the land of Canaan. Genesis chapter 24. And Abraham was old, and the Lord had blessed him in all things. And one day he said to his oldest servant, Eliezer of Damascus, who was in charge of all his household, "Put your hand under my thigh, and swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not allow my son to marry a daughter of the Canaanites. Instead, you must go to my homeland and to my relatives, and take a wife for my son Isaac from there." And his servant answered, "What if the woman isn't willing to follow me back to this place? Should I take your son back to your homeland instead?" "No," Abraham replied. "Whatever you do, do not take my son back there. For the Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house and from my relatives, spoke to me and promised he would give this land to my offspring. God will send his angel before you and help you find a wife for my son. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you are free from your oath. Only you must never take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under Abraham's thigh and swore to him that he would do as Abraham had asked. Then Eliezer took 10 camels and headed to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. When Eliezer reached there, he made his camels kneel down by a well outside of the city at evening time, which was the time the young woman would come out and draw water. And he prayed, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, please grant me success and show kindness to my master. Look, I'm standing here by the well of water, and the young women are coming out to the well. I ask you this, that the woman I ask, 'Please let down your pitcher so I may drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I will give your camels water also,' that she will be the one you have chosen for Isaac. In this way I'll know that you have showed kindness to my master. Before Eliezer had even finished praying, Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, came out with a pitcher on her shoulder, and the girl was very beautiful to look upon, and also a virgin. The young woman went down to the well, filled up her pitcher, and came back up. Abraham's servant ran to meet her, and he said to her, "Please, may I have a drink of water from your pitcher?" And Rebekah said, "Go ahead and drink, my lord." Then she quickly lowered her pitcher and gave him a drink of water. And when she was done giving him a drink, she said, "I'll also draw water for your camels until they have finished drinking." With those words, the young woman quickly emptied her pitcher into the trough, ran to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all of his camels. Eliezer stood there, holding his peace and wondering if the Lord had truly answered his prayer. Finally, after the camels had finished drinking, the old servant took out a golden earring and 2 bracelets of gold and gave them to the young lady. "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to lodge in?" "I am the daughter of Bethuel and the granddaughter of Milcah and Nahor. And yes, we have plenty of straw and food for your camels and room for you to lodge in." And Eliezer bowed his head in worship and said, "Blessed be the Lord God, who has not denied his loving kindness and truth to my master, for the Lord has led me to my master's relatives." At hearing his words, the young woman ran and told her family all about what had happened. And when Laban, who was Rebekah's brother, saw her new earrings and bracelets and heard about the man at the well, he ran out to greet him. "Come in, blessed of the Lord," Laban said to him. "Why do you stand out here? I have prepared the house and room for your camels." So Eliezer went to Laban's home, and they unpacked his camels, gave them straw and food, and provided water to wash Eliezer's feet, along with the men who had traveled with him. Then they served him food, but Eliezer said, "I will not eat until I have stated my business." "Speak on," Laban said. "I am Abraham's servant, and the Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become wealthy and powerful. He has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold, and men servants and maid servants and camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, gave birth to a son in her old age, and Abraham has given him everything he has. And my master made me swear, saying, 'You are not to take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, where we are living, but you must go to my relatives and find a wife for my son from there.' And I said unto my master, 'What if the woman will not follow me?'" Then Eliezer proceeded to tell Laban and his family everything he and Abraham had discussed, and how, when Eliezer had stood by the well, he had prayed to God concerning the woman who would be Isaac's wife, and that she would give him a drink and then water all the camels. "And before I had done speaking in my heart," the old servant said to them, "Rebekah came out with her pitcher on her shoulder, and she went to the well and drew water. Then I asked her for her drink. Not only did she give me a drink, but she also watered my camels, just as I prayed for. And then she told me she was the granddaughter of Nahor, my master's brother. So I blessed and worshipped the Lord, who has clearly led me straight to my master's niece, to be his son's wife. And now if you will deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left and leave." Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The thing comes from the Lord. We dare not speak to you good or bad. Here, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be your master's son's wife, as the Lord has spoken." When Abraham's servant heard their words, he worshipped the Lord and bowed to the ground. Then he brought forth jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment, and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave her brother and her mother precious things. And everyone ate and drank, and then went to bed. Then they rose up in the morning, and Eliezer said to Rebekah's family, "Send me back to my master." But her mother and brother protested, "Let the girl stay with us for a few days, at least 10. After that she can go." But Abraham's servant said, "Don't delay me, seeing as the Lord has blessed my mission. Please send me away so I may return to my master." "We will call Rebekah," the family said, "and ask her for her opinion." So they called Rebekah and asked her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." So they sent away Rebekah their sister, and her nurse, and Eliezer and his men. And they blessed Rebekah, and said to her, "May you, our sister, become the mother of thousands of millions, and may your descendants conquer the city gate of those who hate them." Then Rebekah and her maids mounted the camels, and followed Eliezer back to his master. Meanwhile Isaac, who lived in the Negev, had just returned from Beer Lahai-roi. One evening, as he was walking and praying in the fields, he looked up and spotted the camels coming. And Rebekah looked up and saw Isaac, then quickly got off her camel. "Who is that man walking through the fields to meet us?" she asked the servant. "It is my master," he said. So Rebekah took a veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac everything he had done. And Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother's tent, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Genesis chapter 25. After a while, Abraham remarried and took a wife named Keturah. Together they had 6 more sons: Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. And those sons had more sons. But Abraham gave everything he owned to Isaac. But he also gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, and then sent them away from Isaac towards the east country. Finally, at 175 years old, Abraham died as an old man who had lived a long, satisfying life, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, where Sarah his wife had previously been buried. After Abraham passed away, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived by the well Lahai-roi. During this time, Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar, had married a wife and fathered 12 sons, who became princes of their own tribes. Then Ishmael lived to be 137 years old before he passed away, and his descendants settled from Havilah to Shur and lived east of all his relatives. As for Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, he was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel and the sister of Laban the Syrian. But 20 years passed, and Rebekah had no children, because she was barren. So Isaac went and prayed to the Lord for his wife, and the Lord heard his prayers, and Rebekah became pregnant. But the children struggled within her, kicking and shoving at one another, and Rebekah said, "If the Lord has heard our prayer, then why am I like this?" So she went to the Lord and asked him. The Lord answered her. "2 nations are in your womb," he said, "and from the very beginning the 2 nations will be rivals. The one people will be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." And when Rebekah gave birth, sure enough, there were twins in her womb. The first baby came out red all over like a hairy garment, so they called him Esau, which means hairy. After that, his brother came out with his hand holding tight to Esau's heel, so his parents named him Jacob, which means one who grabs by the heel, supplanter. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah finally gave birth to the boys. Time passed, and the boys grew up. Esau became a cunning hunter, a man of the outdoors. But Jacob was a quiet and peaceful man who liked to stay at home in the tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating his venison. But Rebekah loved Jacob. One day Jacob was cooking a pot of reddish-brown lentil stew, and Esau came from the field, tired and starving. "Please, give me some of that red stew. I'm starving," Esau said to Jacob his brother. But Jacob said, "Not until you sell me your birthright first." "What good is it to me if I die from starvation?" Esau said. "Go ahead, you can have it." "Swear to me I can have it," Jacob insisted. So Esau swore an oath and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and a bowl of lentil soup, and Esau ate and drank, then got up and left. Thus Esau despised his birthright. In Genesis chapter 26, there was a famine in the land, just like there had been in the days of Abraham. So Isaac traveled to Gerar, where Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, lived. And the Lord appeared to Isaac and told him, "Don't go down into Egypt. Instead, stay where I tell you. Live in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For I will give all these countries to you and to your offspring, and I will keep my promise to Abraham your father. And I will make your offspring multiply like the stars of heaven, and in your seed will all the nations of the earth be blessed, because Abraham listened and obeyed all my requirements, my commands, decrees, and instructions. So Isaac listened to God and lived in Gerar. And the men living there asked him about his wife. So Isaac said to them, "She is my sister," because he was afraid to tell them she was his wife. "They might kill me for her," he thought to himself, "because she is a beautiful woman." After they'd been living there for a long time, King Abimelech of the Philistines happened to look out of the window of his castle one day and saw Isaac was caressing Rebekah, his wife. So the king called Isaac and said in anger, "Look, she is certainly your wife. So how come you said, 'She is my sister'?" "Because I was afraid someone would kill me for her," Isaac said. "What is this you have done to us?" King Abimelech protested. "One of my men might easily have been intimate with your wife, and then you would have brought guilt upon all of us." Right afterwards, King Abimelech commanded his people, saying, "He that touches this man or his wife will surely be put to death." Then Isaac sowed in Gerar in the time of famine, and harvested 100 times more than he planted, because the Lord blessed him. And as time went on, Isaac became great and continued to gain more and more wealth, until he became very wealthy, with large flocks and herds and many servants. And soon the Philistines became very envious, and in their envy the Philistines filled all the wells Abraham had previously dug. Then King Abimelech came to Isaac and said to him, "You must leave, because you are become far too mighty." So Isaac left that area and set up his tents in the valley of Gerar and stayed there. He redug all the wells his father Abraham had dug, for the Philistines had filled them in with dirt after his father's death, and he gave them the same names as Abraham had. After Isaac's servants dug in the valley, they found a well of fresh water. But the herdsmen of Gerar fought with Isaac's herdsmen and said, "The water is ours." So Isaac called the name of the well Esek, which means argument. And they dug another well, and yet again the men of Gerar fought for it. And Isaac called this one Sitnah, which means hostility. Isaac left that area, and once more his men dug another well. And finally, no one fought them for it. So Isaac named it Rehoboth, which means open space. "For now the Lord has made room for us," he said, "and we will be fruitful in the land." Then Isaac moved to Beersheba, and that same night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you and multiply your seed for my servant Abraham's sake." After hearing God's voice, Isaac pitched his tent at Beersheba, built an altar, and called upon the name of the Lord. And Isaac's servants dug yet another well. Once more, King Abimelech of Gerar visited Isaac, along with Ahuzath, his adviser, and Phicol, the chief captain of his army. "Why have you come to see me, seeing as you hate me?" Isaac said to them, "and you sent me away from you." "Because we saw that the Lord was certainly with you," they said, "and we said among ourselves, there should be an oath between you and us. That is why we've come, to make a covenant with you, that you will do no harm to us, because we haven't harmed you. In fact, we've done nothing but good to you, and we sent you away in peace. See, you are now blessed of the Lord." At their words, Isaac threw them a feast, and they all ate and drank. Then they rose up early in the morning, swore oaths of peace one to another, and left in peace. On the same day, Isaac's servants came running to him and said, "We found water." And Isaac named the well they had dug Sheba, which means oath. The years passed by, and Esau turned 40 years old. And when he turned 40, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, and Bashemoth, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite. And the two women were a source of grief to Esau's parents, Isaac and Rebekah. Genesis chapter 27. Time passed, and one day when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his oldest son, and said to him, "My son." And Esau said, "Here I am." "I'm an old man," said Isaac, "and I don't know the day I will die. Now take your weapons, go out to the field and hunt for some venison. Then make me some tasty meat, the meat that I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, and my soul will bless you." As the two of them spoke in the tent, Rebekah, Esau's mother, listened in, and as her oldest son headed off to hunt, she said to Jacob, her younger son, "Listen, I overheard your father speaking to Esau, your brother. He said, 'Bring me venison and make me tasty meat that I may eat, and bless you before the Lord before I die.' Now listen, my son, and do what I tell you. Go to the flock and fetch 2 kids from the goats. I will make your father the meat he loves. Then you will take it to him so he may eat and bless you instead before his death." But Jacob protested, "Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a smooth man. What if father feels me? He'll see that I'm trying to deceive him, and I'll bring a curse upon myself, and not a blessing." But his mother said, "May your curse be on me, my son. Only listen, and go bring the young goats to me." So Jacob listened and fetched the kids, and his mother made a tasty meal. Then Rebekah took Esau's clothes and put them on Jacob, along with the skins of the goats on Jacob's hands and on the smooth part of his neck. After this, she gave Jacob the meat and the bread she had prepared with some wine, and sent him to his father's tent. Jacob went to his father. "My father," he said. "Yes, who are you, my son?" "I am Esau," Jacob lied, "your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Please sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." Isaac asked, "How is it that you have found the game so quickly, my son?" "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." But Isaac wasn't yet convinced. "Please come close to me so I may touch you, my son, and see if you really are my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he didn't recognize Jacob because his hands were hairy, like his brother Esau's hands. So Isaac, his father, blessed him. "Are you really my son Esau?" Isaac asked one last time, and Jacob replied, "I am." Then Isaac said, "Bring the food near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, and I will bless you." So Jacob brought it to him, and his father ate the venison and drank the wine. Then his father Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near now and kiss me, my son." As Jacob came close and kissed him, Isaac smelled the scent of his clothes and finally blessed him, saying, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth. People will serve you, and nations will bow down before you. You will be lord over your brothers, and your mother's sons will bow down to you. Cursed is everyone who curses you, and blessed are those who bless you." Right after Isaac finished blessing Jacob, and mere moments after he had left the tent, Esau came in from hunting, and he also had made delicious meat and brought it to his father. "Sit up, father," he said, "and eat of your son's venison, so your soul can bless me." "Who are you?" Isaac asked. "I'm your son," Esau said, "your firstborn, Esau." Isaac began to tremble exceedingly and said, "Then who was the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it before you came, and I blessed him. Yes, and he will remain blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said to his father, "Oh, bless me, father, even me as well." But Isaac said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing." "Is he not rightly named Jacob?" Esau growled, "for he has supplanted me twice. He took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing." Then Esau asked, "Haven't you saved even one blessing for me, my father?" "No," Isaac answered. I have made Jacob your lord and master, and all his brothers I have given to him as servants, and I have blessed him with grain and new wine. What can I do now for you, my son?" But Esau begged him, "Haven't you even one blessing left, father? Oh, my father, bless me too." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. As Esau cried, Isaac said, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness and away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by your sword and serve your brother. But it will come to pass that when you decide to break free, you will break his yoke from off your neck." After this, Esau greatly hated Jacob for stealing his blessing, and in his heart he said, "Soon my father will die, and then I will kill my brother Jacob." Esau's words were reported back to Rebekah, and she sent for her son Jacob and urged him, "Listen, your brother Esau is comforting himself with the thought of killing you. Now, my son, obey me, and flee to Laban your brother in Haran. Stay with him for a while, until your brother's fury has subsided and his anger against you is forgotten. Then I will send for you and bring you back. Why should I lose both of my sons in one day?" Rebekah then went to Isaac her husband and said, "I am tired of living because of the daughters of Heth, these wives of Esau. If Jacob also takes a wife from these local Hittites, what good will my life be to me?" In Genesis chapter 28, Isaac called for Jacob, blessed him, and told him, "You are not to take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Instead, go to Paddan-aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you, and make you fruitful and multiply you, so that you become a multitude of people, and give you the blessing of Abraham, to you and to your seed with you, that you may inherit this land where you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham." Then Isaac sent Jacob away, and Jacob traveled to Paddan-aram, to Laban his uncle. When Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away with the instructions not to take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, he realized how much his 2 Hittite wives did not please his father. So Esau went to Ishmael, his uncle, and married Mahalath, the sister of Nebaioth, and daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son. Jacob left Beersheba and traveled towards Haran. On his journey, he stopped in a place for the night after the sun had set and stayed there. Grabbing one of the stones, he used it as his pillow and lay down to sleep. But as he slept, Jacob dreamt of a ladder placed on the earth, with its top reaching up to heaven, and the angels of God descending and ascending upon it. The Lord stood at the top of the ladder and said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, spreading west, north, east, and south. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you." When Jacob woke up from his dream, he was afraid and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. How dreadful is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone he had used as a pillow, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He named that place Bethel, though the city was previously called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me, and will protect me as I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothes to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone which I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you." Genesis chapter 28. Then Jacob left on his journey and arrived at the land of the people of the east. When he looked, he saw a well in the field, and there were 3 flocks of sheep by it, because they would remove the heavy stone covering the well's mouth in order to water the sheep, and then put the stone back. Jacob called out to the men around the well, "My brothers, where do you come from?" "We're from Haran," they said. "Do you know Laban?" Jacob asked, "the son of Nahor?" "We know him," they said. "Is he well?" "Yes, he is. And look," they added, "Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." "But "The sun is still high in the sky," Jacob said. "It's not time for the cattle to be gathered together. You should water the sheep and then go back out to pasture." "We can't leave until all the flocks are gathered," they explained, "and the shepherds roll away the stone covering the well. Then we'll water the sheep." While Jacob was still speaking to them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, and his uncle's sheep, he went over, rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered Laban's flock. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, raised his voice, and wept. He told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. When Laban heard about Jacob, he ran out to meet him, embraced him, greeted him, and brought him to his house. Jacob told him who he was, and Laban said, "You are my flesh and blood." So Jacob stayed with his uncle for a month. But at the end of the month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are my relative, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Jacob loved Rachel and said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than to another man. Stay and work with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed like only a few days to him because of his great love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban at the end of the 7 years, "I have fulfilled my agreement. Now give me my wife, that I may be with her." So Laban gathered together all the men of the place and threw a great big wedding feast. But in the evening, instead of Rachel, Laban took Leah, his eldest daughter, and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob, who didn't know what his uncle had done, slept with her. Laban also gave Zilpah, his maid, to his daughter Leah as a handmaid. But in the morning, when Jacob woke up, he discovered it was Leah laying beside him. And he said in anger to Laban, "What have you done to me? Didn't I work for you for 7 years for Rachel? Why have you deceived and tricked me like this?" "It isn't the tradition here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older," Laban said smoothly. "Fulfill Leah's week, then we will give you Rachel also, and in return you will work for me for 7 more years." So Jacob agreed and fulfilled Leah's week. Then Laban gave him Rachel as his wife. Laban also gave Rachel a maid named Bilhah for her handmaid. So Jacob slept with Rachel, and he loved her much more than Leah, and he served Laban, his uncle, another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and gave birth to a son, and named him Reuben, for she said, "Surely the Lord has seen my affliction, and now my husband will love me." She conceived again, and bore a second son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I was hated, he has given me this son as well." And she named him Simeon. She conceived a 3rd time, and said, "Surely this time my husband will feel affection for me, for I have given him 3 sons." So she named him Levi. And she conceived yet again, and gave birth to a 4th son, and said, "Now I will praise the Lord." Leah named this child Judah, and then she stopped having children. In Genesis chapter 30, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister Leah, and said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I will die." Then Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God, who has denied you children?" So Rachel said, "Here, take my maid Bilhah, and sleep with her. She will bear children for me, so I too can have a family." So she gave him Bilhah, her maid, to Jacob as wife, and Jacob slept with her. Bilhah became pregnant and gave Jacob a son. "God has judged me," Rachel said, "and has also heard my voice, and has given me a son." So she named him Dan. Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again and bore Jacob a 2nd child. Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have struggled with my sister, and I have prevailed." So she called him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped getting pregnant, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as a wife, which means Jacob now had 4 wives. Soon Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah named him Gad, for she said, "How fortunate I am." Zilpah then bore Jacob a second son. "Happy am I," Leah declared, "for the daughters will call me blessed." So she called his name Asher. Now at the time of wheat harvest, Reuben, the oldest child, went out and found some mandrakes in the field, and he brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to her sister, "Please, give me some of your son's mandrakes." But Leah said angrily, "Wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now you want to steal my son's mandrakes too?" "Jacob will sleep with you tonight for your son's mandrakes," Rachel replied. So that evening, when Jacob came in from the field, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must sleep with me tonight, for I have paid for you with my son's mandrakes." And Jacob slept with Leah that night. God listened to Leah's prayers, and she became pregnant and gave Jacob a fifth son. "God has given me my hire, because I have given my maid to my husband," Leah said. So she called the boy's name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and gave birth to a sixth son for Jacob, and she said, "God has endowed me with a good dowry. Now my husband will honor me, because I have given him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards she gave birth to a daughter and called her Dinah. Finally, God remembered Rachel. He answered her prayers and opened her womb. She conceived, gave birth to a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." She named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban his uncle, "Send me away, so I may go back to my own place in my own country, and give me my wives and children who I have served you these 14 years for, and let me go, for you know how hard I've worked for you." But Laban protested. "Please stay," he said. "I know how the Lord has blessed me because of you. Just name your wages and I'll give them to you." Jacob said, "I've worked diligently for you, and your flocks and herds have grown under my care. You had hardly anything before I came, but now it has increased to a multitude. But what about me? When can I start providing for my own family?" "So what should I give you?" Laban asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "If you'll do just this one thing for me, I'll keep on feeding and taking care of your flock. Let me look through your flocks today and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted, along with all the black sheep. These will be my wages. That way, in the future, if you find any goats without speckles or spots, or any sheep that are not black in my flock, you will know I have stolen them from you." "I agree," Laban said. "Let it be done according to your word." But that very day, Laban went out and removed all the male and female goats that were streaked and spotted or had white patches, and all the black sheep. He placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. That way they wouldn't breed with the white sheep and create more speckled and spotted sheep. In the meantime, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took some fresh branches from poplar, hazel, and chestnut trees, and he peeled strips of bark from them so you could see the white part underneath. Then he placed those peeled branches in the watering troughs where the animals came to drink. So when the animals mated in front of the white streaked branches, they gave birth to streaked, speckled, and spotted offspring. Jacob then separated those lambs, and as he had done with the peeled branches, he made the flocks face toward the streaked, and all the dark or black in the new flock of Laban, and he kept his own herds separate from Laban's flock. Furthermore, every time the strong, healthy females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering troughs in front of them. But when the animals were sickly, he didn't place the branches there. So the sick animals were Laban's, and the healthy and strong ones were Jacob's. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy, and he ended up owning large flocks and herds of sheep and goats, lots of female and male servants, and many camels and donkeys. Genesis chapter 31. Time passed, and one day Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken away everything that was our father's. His wealth is at our father's expense." And Jacob also noticed a negative change in Laban's attitude towards him. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." So Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where he kept his flock, and he said to them, "I've noticed that your father's attitude towards me has turned negative, but the God of my father has been with me. You know how hard I've worked for your father, yet he has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God has not allowed him to harm me. If Laban said, 'The speckled will be your wages,' then all the flock gave birth to speckled. And if he said, 'The striped will be your wages,' then all the flock's offspring were striped. Thus God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. In fact, during the mating season, I had a dream, and I saw that the male goats mating with the females were streaked, spotted, and speckled. And in my dream, the angel of God said to me, 'Jacob.' And I said, 'Here I am.' And the angel said, 'Lift up your eyes and see. The rams which are mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, and spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now get up, leave this place, and return to the land of your birth.'" After hearing Jacob's words, Rachel and Leah said, "Is there anything left here for us? We won't get our father's inheritance anyway, and he's treating us like strangers. He has sold us and then spent all of the money that rightfully belonged to us. In fact, all of the wealth that God has given you from our father legally belongs to us and our children. So whatever God has told you to do, go ahead and do it." So while Laban was gone shearing his sheep, Jacob secretly got up, placed his sons and wives on camels, and left Paddan Aram. He took all of his livestock and all the possessions he had gained and headed back to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. And without Jacob's knowledge, Rachel stole her father's household idols. So Jacob fled without telling his uncle Laban. Then he crossed the river and headed towards Mount Gilead. 3 days later, someone told Laban that Jacob had fled. So Laban took his relatives with him and hotly chased after Jacob for 7 days till he caught up with him. But the night before Laban caught up with Jacob, God came to him in a dream at night and said, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob, either good or bad." Then Laban caught up with Jacob, who had set up camp in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to his son-in-law, "What do you mean by deceiving me like this?" he demanded. "How dare you drag my daughters away like they were prisoners of war? Why did you slip away secretly and deceive me instead of telling me you wanted to leave? I could have sent you away with a farewell feast, with singing and music and tambourines and harps. You didn't even allow me to kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have acted beyond foolishly, and I could destroy you for this. But the God of your father appeared to me last night and said, 'Be careful not to speak to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now, I can understand you wanted to leave because you're homesick for your father's family. But why did you steal my household gods?" "I left secretly because I was afraid," Jacob told him. "I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But as for your gods, look for them, and if a person has taken them, that person will surely die. Now go ahead, search my possessions before all of our relatives, and if you find something that belongs to you, I'll give it back." But Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen the idols. So Laban searched Jacob's tent, then Leah's, and then the 2 maidservants' tents, Zilpah and Bilhah, but he didn't find them. Then he went into Rachel's tent. But Rachel had taken the household idols, hid them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. So when Laban searched her tent, he didn't find them there either. And Rachel said to her father, "Please, sir, forgive me if I don't get up for you, for the custom of woman is upon me." Laban continued searching, but he couldn't find the idols. Then Jacob became extremely angry and confronted his uncle. "What's my crime?" he demanded. "What sin have I committed to make you chase after me as though I were a horrible criminal? You've searched through all my possessions. Now show me what you found that belongs to you, Go ahead and set it here in front of us for everyone to see. Let them judge between us. For 20 years I've stayed with you and cared for your flocks. In all those years your sheep and goats never miscarried. I never ate any of your rams. And if one of your animals was torn by beasts, I didn't bother you with it. Instead, I bore the loss. You made me pay for every animal that was stolen, whether it was taken by day or at night. I worked for you through the scorching heat of the day and through cold and sleepless nights. These 20 years I've been with you, I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and then 6 more years for your flock. And you changed my wages 10 times. In fact, if the God of my father hadn't been with me, the God of Abraham and the fearsome God of Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen mine affliction and the hard work of mine hands. That's why he rebuked you last night. Then Laban said in a huff, "These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do today to these my daughters or to their children? Now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, and Jacob told his relatives, "Gather stones." Everyone collected rocks and piled them in a heap, and they ate next to the pile of stones. Laban called the place Jegar Sahadutha, which means witness pile in Aramaic, and Jacob called it Galid, which means witness pile in Hebrew. But it was also called Mizpah, which means watchtower, for Laban said to his son-in-law, "This pile of stones will serve as a witness between you and me today. May the Lord watch between us when we are absent from each other. If you mistreat my daughters or marry other women, God will see it, even if no one else does. He is a witness to this covenant between us. Look," Laban added, "here is this pile of stones, and this pillar that I have placed between you and me. They are witnesses that I will not pass beyond here to harm you, and you will not pass beyond here to harm me. May the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us." So Jacob made an oath by the fear of his father Isaac. Then he offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his relatives to eat with him. And everyone ate a meal and spent the night on the mountain. Early in the morning, Laban got up, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters goodbye, and blessed them. Then he left and went home. In Genesis chapter 32, Jacob continued on his journey home, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw the angels, he said, "This is God's host," and he called that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers to Esau, his brother, who lived in the region of Seir in the land of Edom. He told his messengers to say, "Your servant Jacob has been staying with Laban, and now I have oxen, donkeys, men servants, and women servants, and I've sent these messengers to tell my lord of my coming, hoping that you will show grace to me." The messengers went to Esau, and when they returned to Jacob, they said, "We went and told your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you with an army of 400 men. When Jacob heard this, he was terrified. He divided all of his people, his flocks, camels, and herds, into 2 different groups, and he said, "If Esau kills one company, maybe the other one will be able to escape." Then Jacob prayed to God, "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your people, and I will make you prosper.' I am unworthy of all the mercy and faithfulness you have shown me, your servant. When I first crossed over this river, I only had my staff, but now I've become 2 groups of people. Please save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid that he will come and attack me and my wives and the children. You said, 'I will surely treat you well, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.'" So Jacob spent the night there. Then he selected a present for his brother Esau from his livestock: 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys with 10 foals. He separated the animals into different groups, led by different servants. Then he told those servants, "Go ahead of me and make sure there is space between each group of animals. "When my brother Esau meets you," Jacob commanded the first servant, "he will ask you, 'Whose servants are you? Where are you going? Who owns these animals?' You must tell him, 'They belong to your servant Jacob, but they are a gift for his master Esau. Look, he is coming behind us.'" Jacob then commanded the rest of the group of servants to say the exact same thing to Esau as they presented their gifts. "In this way," Jacob thought, "I will appease my brother with the gifts that go before me. Then afterwards, when he sees me, maybe he'll accept and forgive me." So the gifts went on ahead while Jacob stayed that night in the camp. But later that night, Jacob got up, took his 2 wives, 2 woman servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He sent them across the stream, along with all his possessions. And so Jacob was left alone, and a man came and wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he wasn't winning against Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and dislocated it as he wrestled with him. "Let me go," the man said, "for the sun rises." But Jacob said, "I won't let you go, not until you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. But the man said, "Why are you asking about my name?" And after saying that, he blessed Jacob. The man left, and Jacob named that place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising above Jacob as he crossed over from Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. That is why, even till this day, the Israelites won't eat the hip tendon that connects to the hip socket, because the man strained the tendon of Jacob's hip. Genesis chapter 33. Then Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming towards him with 400 men. He quickly divided his children and wives into 3 groups. He placed the handmaids Zilpah and Bilhah with their children in the front, Leah with her children in the middle, and Rachel with Joseph at the very back. Then Jacob crossed over the stream and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he reached his brother. But Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around his neck, and the 2 brothers wept for joy. Then Esau looked up at the woman and children and asked, "Who are these people with you?" Jacob replied, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." The handmaids came close with their children and bowed down. Then Leah came with her children and bowed, and finally Rachel and Joseph bowed down as well. "What do you mean by all these flocks I've met?" Esau asked. "They are to find favor in your eyes," Jacob replied. "I have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have," Esau said. "No, please," Jacob insisted. "If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my gifts. For seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, and you've accepted me. So please take them. God has been gracious to me. I have more than enough." So Jacob kept insisting, and finally Esau accepted his gifts. Then Esau said, "Let's travel together, and I'll lead the way." But Jacob said, "My Lord knows that the children are young and frail, and the flocks and herds have young. If they're driven too hard for even one day, all the animals will die. So please, go ahead without your servant, and I'll follow slowly until I meet you at Seir." "Well, at least let me leave some of my men with you to lead you," Esau suggested. "That's not necessary," Jacob said. "It's enough that I found favor in your sight, my lord." So Esau turned around at last and headed back to his home Seir, while Jacob traveled on to Succoth. When he arrived, he built a house and made shelters for his livestock. That's why they named the place Succoth, which means shelters. Later, after traveling all the way from Paddan Aram, Jacob finally arrived safely at the town of Shechem in the land of Canaan. He set up camp in front of the walled city, and then he bought a piece of land from the family of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver. There he built an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. In Genesis chapter 34, Dinah, the daughter of Leah and Jacob, went out to see the young woman who lived in the area. But when the local prince, Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, saw her, he kidnapped her and forced Dinah to lie with him.
But afterward, his soul clung to her. He fell in love with her, and he tried to win her affection with comforting words. Shechem then said to his father, "Get me this young woman as a wife." Soon Jacob heard that Shechem had dishonored his daughter Dinah, but his sons were in the field with the livestock, so Jacob said nothing until they arrived. In the meantime, Shechem's father, Hamor, went to Jacob and talked with him. Soon Jacob's sons came in from the field, but when they heard about what had happened, they were shocked and angry and furious, for Shechem had done a disgraceful thing to Israel's family by forcing Jacob's daughter, a thing that should never be done. But Hamor tried to appease them by saying, "My son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife and intermarry with us. You may marry our daughters, and we will marry yours. Live here in the land with us, for it is open to you. Stay, trade, and acquire property." Then young Shechem said to Dinah's brothers, "Please be kind to me, and let me marry her," he pleaded, "and I'll give you whatever you ask. Make the bride price as high as you like, and I'll pay whatever you tell me. Just give me the girl to be my wife." However, Dinah's brothers answered Shechem and Hamor deceitfully because of what Shechem had done to their sister. They said to them, "We can't do this. We can't give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace. We will only agree on one condition, that you become like us by circumcising all of your males. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you do not listen and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and leave." Hamor and Shechem agreed to the conditions, and the young man didn't hesitate because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now Shechem was more honored and respected than all the other members in his father's household. So Hamor and Shechem went to the city gate and spoke to the leaders of the city, saying, "These men are peaceful and friendly. We should let them live in the land and trade in it, for the land is large enough for the both of us. Let us take their daughters as wives and give our daughters to them. But they'll only do this on one condition, if every male here is circumcised, as they are. And if we do this, won't their livestock and possessions eventually be ours? So come, let's agree to their terms and let them live here among us." So all the leading men agreed with Hamor and Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. But on the third day, when all the men were still sore and in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's full-blooded brothers, took their swords, boldly entered the city, and killed every last male. They killed Hamor and Shechem with the sword, took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and left. Then Jacob's other sons arrived and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They seized the flocks, the herds, the donkeys, and everything in the city and in the fields. They plundered the houses and took all of the children, the wives, and led them away as captives. Afterwards, Jacob yelled at Simeon and Levi in a panic, "You have ruined me. You have made me stink among all the people of this land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack, I will be destroyed, both me and my household." But they retorted angrily, "Should we allow him to treat our sister like a prostitute?"
Genesis chapter 35. And God said to Jacob,
"Get up, go to Bethel, and live there. Make an altar to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau."
So Jacob told his household and everyone living with them,
"Get rid of the strange gods among you, cleanse yourselves, and put on clean clothes. We are traveling to Bethel, where I will make an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I go."
So they gave Jacob all their strange gods and all their earrings, and he hid them under the oak near Shechem. As they traveled, the terror of God fell on the cities all around them, so they didn't chase after the sons of Jacob. Finally, Jacob arrived at Luz, also called Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because God had appeared to him there when he was fleeing from his brother Esau. Soon afterward, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse,
died, and they buried her beneath Bethel under an oak, which they named Alan Bacuth, which means oak of weeping. Once again God appeared to Jacob and blessed him. "Your name is Jacob," he said, "but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." Then God said, "I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a group of nations will come from you, and kings will come from your loins. The land I gave Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you and to your descendants." After God spoke to him, Jacob set up a stone pillar, poured wine over it as an offering to God, and anointed the stone with olive oil, and he named the place Bethel. Then Jacob left there, and he and his family traveled towards Ephrath. But while they were still far away, Rachel went into hard labor, and she had a very difficult delivery. Right after giving birth, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, you have another son." As Rachel breathed her last breath, for she died right after giving birth, she named the baby Benoni, which means son of my sorrow. But Jacob called him Benjamin, son of my right hand. And so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar on her grave, and it's still there to this day. Then Israel continued on his journey, and he set up a camp beyond the Tower of Eder. But while they were living there, Reuben, his eldest son, went and slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. Now Jacob had 12 sons. Leah had Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Rachel had Joseph and Benjamin. Bilhah, Rachel's maid, had Dan and Naphtali. Zilpah, Leah's maid, had Gad and Asher. Finally, Jacob returned to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had lived as foreigners. Isaac lived for 180 years. Then he died and joined his ancestors at a ripe old age, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. In Genesis chapter 36, we read of the generations of Esau. Esau married 3 women, Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. Ada gave birth to a son named Eliphaz. Basemath gave birth to Reuel. Oholibamah had 3 sons, Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. So Esau had 5 sons. Eventually, Esau had to take his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all of his servants, along with his cattle and all the wealth he had gained in the land of Canaan, and move away from his brother Jacob, because their riches were too great, and the land couldn't support all their flocks together. So Esau, also known as Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. Esau lived there, and he became the father of many leaders. Numerous dukes came from Esau's bloodline, along with many princes and kings who reigned in the land of Edom before there reigned any kings over the children of Israel. In Genesis chapter 36, Jacob stayed and lived in the land of Canaan, just like his father Isaac and grandfather Abraham had. And this is the story of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he was taking care of the flock with his half-brothers, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to his father. Now Israel, formerly called Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. When his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than the rest of them, they hated him and couldn't speak a kind word to him. One night, Joseph had a dream, and he shared it with his brothers, and the dream made them hate him even more. "Listen to this dream I had," he said. "We were binding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf arose and stood straight up, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to my sheaf." Hearing his words, his brothers snarled at him. "Are you going to reign over us? Do you really think you'll actually rule over us?" And they hated him even more because of his dream and his words. But Joseph had another dream, which he also shared. "Look," he said, "I've had another dream, and this time The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What kind of dream is that? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you?" But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father pondered on what the dreams could mean. Not long afterwards, his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Israel called for Joseph and said, "Your brothers are pasturing the sheep in Shechem. Come, I will send you to check on them." "Here I am," Joseph replied. "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks," Israel said, "and bring word back to me." So Jacob sent Joseph from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph replied. "Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" The man said, "They have moved on from here. I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them near Dothan. But when his brothers saw him in the distance, they recognized him, and they conspired to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to one another. "Come on, let's kill him and throw his body into one of these cisterns, and then say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his precious dreams." But Reuben overheard them, and he tried to save Joseph by saying, "Let's not kill him. Instead," he suggested, "let's throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." For Reuben's plan was to secretly come back and free Joseph and return him safely to his father. When Joseph arrived, his brothers grabbed him, stripped him of his coat of many colors, and violently threw him into an empty pit without water. Then they sat down to eat their bread. While they ate, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites with camels, carrying spices, balm, and myrrh, coming from Gilead and traveling down to Egypt. "What will we gain by killing our brother?" Judah said to his brothers. "Then we'll have to cover our crime. Instead, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, so we don't have to kill him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And Judah's brothers agreed with this suggestion. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, the brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and the merchants took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph wasn't in it, he tore his clothes in distress. Then he went back to his brothers and cried, "The boy isn't there, and where shall I go to hide from my father?" Then they took Joseph's coat, killed a kid goat, and dipped the coat in its blood. They sent the beautiful robe to their father, saying, "We found this coat. Do you recognize it? Is it your son's coat?" Jacob recognized it at once and cried out, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "I will go down to the grave mourning for my son." Thus Jacob wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders traveled to Egypt, and when they arrived, they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and his captain of the guard.
Genesis chapter 38. Around this time, Judah left his family and went to live with a man named Hira, who lived in Adullam. There he saw a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and Judah married her. Together they had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. When grew up, Judah arranged for him to marry a young woman named Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord killed him. Then Judah told Onan, his second-born, "Go in and marry your brother's wife, and produce an heir for your brother." Onan knew the child wouldn't be his, so when he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his seed on the ground to prevent her from having children. But what he did displeased the Lord, so the Lord killed him as well. Judah then told Tamar, Go back to your parents' home and remain a widow until my son Shelah is old enough to marry you." But Judah was being dishonest with her. He had no intention of keeping his word because he feared Shelah would die as well. So Tamar returned to her father's house. The years passed by, and Judah's wife died. And after the time of mourning was over, he traveled to Timnah to his sheep shears along with his friend Hira the Adullamite. Someone told Tamar, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." When Tamar heard this, she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and sat beside the road at the entrance to the village of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, but she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought Tamar was a prostitute, because she had covered her face. He approached her and said, "Please, let me sleep with you," without realizing she was his daughter-in-law. "What will you give me that you may lie with me?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from the flock," he promised. "What pledge will you give me until you send it?" "What kind of guarantee do you want?" he asked. "Give me your seal and your cord and the staff that is in your hand," she said. So Judah gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she became pregnant. Afterward, Tamar got up, removed her veil, went back home, and put on the garments of her widowhood once again. Later on, Judah sent the young goat with his friend Hira to retrieve his seal, cord, and staff from the woman. But Hira couldn't find her, and when he asked the men at the place, "Where is the prostitute who was sitting at the entrance of Enaim?" they said, "There's never been a prostitute here." So Hira returned to Judah and told him, "I couldn't find her, and the men of the place said, 'There's never been a prostitute there.'" "Then let her keep what I gave her," Judah said. "After all, I sent the young goat as we agreed, but you couldn't find her, and if you go back to keep looking for her, we'll be the laughing stock of the village." 3 months passed by, and someone told Judah, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the prostitute, and now she's pregnant." When Judah heard this, he was enraged. "Bring her out, and let her be burned to death," he commanded. But as they were taking her out to kill her, Tamar sent this message to her father-in-law, "The man who owns these things is the father of my child. Look closely. Whose seal and cord and walking stick are these?" Judah recognized the items at once and admitted they were his. "She is more righteous than I am," he exclaimed, "because I didn't give her to Shelah, my son, as I promised." After this, Judah never slept with Tamar again. Several months passed, and when Tamar went into labor, it turned out there were twins in her womb. One of the babies put out his hand, and the midwife took it and tied a scarlet thread around his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But then he pulled back his hand, and his brother came out first instead. "What?" the midwife exclaimed. "How did you break out first?" So he was named Perez, which means breach, burst forth, or breakthrough. Afterward, his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and they named him Zerah, meaning to arise or shine. Meanwhile, in Genesis chapter 39, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. But even as a slave, the Lord was with Joseph, and he succeeded in everything he did as he worked for his Egyptian master. And Potiphar noticed when he saw how the Lord was with Joseph and caused everything he did to succeed. It pleased him, and Joseph found favor in his eyes. Eventually, Potiphar made Joseph his personal servant and put him in charge of his entire household and all of his possessions. From that time forward, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house and all of his fields because of Joseph. So Potiphar left everything underneath Joseph's care, and with Joseph in charge, he didn't worry about a single thing except for the food he ate. Now, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built man, and after some time, Potiphar's wife began to desire him, and she said to him, "Lie with me." But Joseph refused. "Look," he said, "with me in charge, My master doesn't worry about anything in the house. He has put everything he owns under my control, and no one here has more authority than I do. The only thing he has kept back from me is you, and that's because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God and your husband?" However, Potiphar's wife kept on persisting and pressuring him day after day, but Joseph refused to lie with her or even be alone with her. But then it happened. One day Joseph went into the house to take care of business, and none of the other servants were there. Potiphar's wife caught him by his cloak and said, "Come, lie with me." Joseph tore himself away from her, leaving his cloak in her hands, and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hands and fled outside, she called for her servants and cried, saying, "See, he has brought a Hebrew here to mock us. That man came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed, and when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak with me and ran out of the house." And so Potiphar's wife kept Joseph's cloak with her until Potiphar came home, and then she told him the same story. "That Hebrew slave you brought here came to mock me," she said, "but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak behind with me and ran out of the house." When Potiphar heard his wife's words and how Joseph had mistreated her, he was furious. He took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there Joseph stayed. But even in the prison, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him loving kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the warden. Not much later, the warden put Joseph in charge of managing all the prisoners and over everything that happened there. In fact, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and made whatever he did to prosper. Genesis chapter 40. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and baker offended him and made him angry, and he threw his 2 officials into prison, into the same place where Joseph was, in the house of the captain of the guard. The captain of the guard put Joseph in charge of the cupbearer and the baker, and he looked after them while they stayed there for quite a while. One night, both the cupbearer and the baker had a dream, and when Joseph saw them in the morning, he noticed they were sad and depressed. "Why do you look so downcast today?" he asked them. "We've each had a dream," they answered, "and there was no one to interpret them." "Don't interpretations belong to God?" Joseph said. "Please, tell me." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph what he had dreamt. "In my dream, there was a grapevine with 3 branches, and as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Then I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup into Pharaoh's hand." "This is the interpretation," Joseph said. "The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when that happens, please show kindness to me and mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I've done nothing to deserve being thrown into the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream, and in mine there were 3 baskets of white pastries on my head, and in the top basket there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them from the basket on my head." "This is the interpretation of your dream," Joseph responded. "The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and hang you on the gallows, and the birds will eat your flesh." On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, Pharaoh threw a great feast for all of his servants. He summoned his chief cupbearer and chief baker and restored the cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph said it would be. Yet, even after all that, the chief cupbearer didn't remember Joseph, but forgot all about him. Genesis chapter 41. 2 years passed after the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph, and at the end of those 2 years, Pharaoh had a dream. In the dream, he stood upon the banks of the Nile River when 7 fat, healthy cows came up out of the water and began grazing among the reeds in the marshes. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came out of the Nile River and stood beside the fat ones. Then the thin cows devoured and ate up the 7 healthy cows, and the Pharaoh woke up. But he fell asleep again, and he had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and healthy, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted. But these ones were thin and scorched by the east wind, and the thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy plump ones. Then the Pharaoh woke up again and realized it had been a dream. In the morning, the Pharaoh was so worried and troubled, he sent for all his magicians and all the wise men of Egypt. He told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Finally, the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "I do remember my faults today, for 2 years ago Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. One night the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man there with us who was a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams, and he told us exactly what they meant, each according to his dream, and everything happened precisely as he interpreted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was hanged." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, Joseph came and stood before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to him, "I have dreamed a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you, that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "It is beyond my power to do this," Joseph replied, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." So Pharaoh said to him, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when up out of the river came 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and ugly and thin. I've never seen such sickly-looking cows in all of Egypt, and these thin, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat ones. Yet after they ate them, you couldn't tell, because they were just as thin and sickly-looking as before. Then I woke up, but I fell asleep, and I had a second dream, and in it I saw 7 heads of grain, plump and healthy, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 other heads of grain, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted after them. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good ones. Now, I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could explain them to me." "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same," Joseph said to Pharaoh. "God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are also 7 years. The 2 dreams are one. The 7 thin, ugly cows that came up later, and the 7 thin heads of grain scorched by the east wind, represent 7 years of famine. This is the message I have for you. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Listen carefully. 7 years of great abundance will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But afterward, 7 years of famine and hunger will come, and it will be so terrible that all the abundance of the previous years will be forgotten, as if it never happened. Famine will destroy the land, and it will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. Pharaoh has had this dream twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Therefore, Pharaoh should look for an intelligent and wise man and place him in charge of the land of Egypt, and let Pharaoh appoint supervisors over the land and have them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years, and let them store it away and guard the food in the cities,
so there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, the famine will destroy the land." Now, this plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his advisers, and Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find anyone else like this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" "Since God has revealed this to you," Pharaoh said to Joseph, "clearly there is no one as discerning and wise as you are. From henceforth you will be in charge over my house, and all the people of my land will do as you command. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have greater authority than you. Look, I have set you in charge over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring, placed it on Joseph's finger, dressed him in robes of fine linen, and placed a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and runners went before him proclaiming, "Bow the knee." Furthermore, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Though I am Pharaoh, without your permission, no one will lift a hand or a foot in the entire land of Egypt." So Pharaoh made Joseph ruler over all the land of Egypt, and he named him Zaphnath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. So Joseph traveled throughout the land of Egypt to inspect and govern it. Now Joseph had been in Egypt for 13 years, and he was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Then Joseph left the Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land. And just like Joseph said, for 7 years the land produced bounteous harvests, and during those years he gathered all the crops in Egypt and stored the grain in the surrounding cities. For 7 years Joseph piled up huge amounts of grain, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped trying to count it because there was too much to measure. During this time 2 sons were born to Joseph before the years of famine, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, gave birth to. Joseph named the first one Manasseh, meaning causing to forget, for he said, "God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's household." He named the second son Ephraim, meaning fruitfulness, for he said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Then the 7 years of abundance came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said it would. And the famine also struck all the surrounding countries, but in the land of Egypt there was food. Eventually, however, the famine spread throughout Egypt as well, and when the people cried to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you to." So when the famine covered the earth, Joseph opened up the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt, and people from every country came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was everywhere. In Genesis chapter 42, Jacob learned there was grain in Egypt, and he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around staring at one another and not doing anything? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go there and buy some for us, so we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers traveled down to Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, because he said, "I am afraid something might happen to him." So the sons of Israel traveled to Egypt to buy grain, along with many others, for the famine was severe throughout the land of Canaan, and Joseph was the governor over the land, and he was the one who sold grain to all the people. When Joseph's brothers came, they bowed down to the ground before him. Joseph saw his brothers, and he recognized them right away, and he remembered the dreams he had when he was young. But even though he recognized them, they didn't recognize him. So Joseph hid his identity and treated them as strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where have you come from?" he asked them. And they replied, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." "You are spies," Joseph accused them. "You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." "No, my lord," they protested. "Your servants have only come to buy food. We are all brothers, the sons of one man, and we are honest men. We are not spies." "Yes, you are," Joseph said. "You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become."
"No, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in Canaan. Please listen. The youngest is with our father today, and one is no longer alive." "It is as I said," Joseph countered. "You are spies. By the life of Pharaoh, you will not leave here unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you must go and bring him, and the rest of you will be kept in prison until you prove you are telling the truth. Otherwise, by the life of Pharaoh, you are certainly spies." Then Joseph put all of them in prison for 3 days. But on the 3rd day, he brought them out and said to them, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, choose one of your brothers to stay here in prison. The rest of you may go and carry home grain for your starving families. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be proven true, and you will not die." The brothers agreed, and they said to each other, "This is happening to us because of what we did to Joseph, for we saw how anguished he was as he pleaded with us for his life, but we wouldn't listen, and because of that, these troubles have come upon us." "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the child?" Reuben scolded them. "But you wouldn't listen, and now we are paying for his blood." Now the 10 brothers didn't know that Joseph understood what they were saying, because he spoke to them through an interpreter. When he heard their words, he turned away from them, left the room, and wept. Then he returned, spoke with them, and took Simeon, and bound him and tied him up in front of them to keep as a hostage in Egypt. Afterwards, Joseph privately gave orders that their bags be filled with grain, and that the money they had used to pay for their grain be put back in their sacks. He also gave them supplies for their journey home. Once this was done, the brothers loaded their donkeys with the grain and left Egypt. But when they stopped for the night, one of the brothers opened his sack to feed his donkey, and he found his money in the top of his sack. "Look at this!" he shouted to his brothers. "My money has been returned. It's right here in my sack." When they heard this, their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to each other and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they returned to their father in the land of Canaan, they told him everything that had happened, and how the Lord of the land had spoken harshly to them and accused them of being spies. "But we told him we are honest men," they said, "that we are 12 sons of one father, one who is no longer alive, and the youngest who is with our father in Canaan." Then the Lord of the country said, "By this I'll know if you're telling the truth. Leave one of your brothers here with me, then take grain to your starving households and go. But you must bring your youngest brother back to me. Then I will know you are not spies, and I will return your brother to you, and you may trade and do business freely in the land." After telling this to their father, the brothers emptied their sacks and discovered that all the money they had used to pay for the grain was in them. When they and Jacob saw the money, they were terrified, and Jacob said to them, "You have robbed me of my children. Joseph is gone, Simeon is gone, and now you want to take Benjamin from me? Everything is against me." And Reuben said, "You may kill my 2 sons if I don't bring Benjamin back to you safely. Put him in my care, and I promise I will bring him back." But Jacob said, "My son will not go down to Egypt with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left of Rachel's children. If any harm should come to him, you would bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." Genesis chapter 43. Time passed, and the famine continued to ravage the land of Canaan. After eating all the grain they had bought in Egypt, Jacob told his sons, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said, "The man made it very clear, saying, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.' Now, if you agree to send Benjamin with us, we'll go and buy food for you. But if you don't send him, we won't go," he continued. "For the man clearly said to us, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" "Why did you treat me so ill?" Jacob moaned. "Why did you tell the man you had another brother?"
Because he kept asking about us and our family, they replied. He asked, "Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?" So we answered truthfully. How could we know, he would say, "Bring your brother down here." Then Judah pleaded with his father, "Please send the boy with me, and we will be on our way. Otherwise, we will all die of starvation, we as well as you and our little ones." "I will guarantee his safety," Judah promised him. "You may hold me responsible if I don't bring him back to you, and I will bear the blame forever. For surely, if we hadn't delayed, we could have gone and returned twice by now." "If it must be so, then do this," Jacob said, finally relenting. "Take some of the best fruits in the land in your sacks. Take them down to the man as gifts, a little balm, a little honey, some spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds. Also, take twice the amount of money, and make sure you return the money that ended up in your sacks from the last time. Perhaps it was a mistake. Now take your brother and go back to the man, and may God Almighty grant you mercy in the man's eyes, so that he may release Simeon and let Benjamin return. And if I must lose my children, so be it." So the brothers took the gifts, twice the amount of money, and Benjamin, and headed back down to Egypt, where they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin was with them, he told his steward, "Bring the men into my house, slay an animal, and make a meal ready for us, for the men will come and dine with me at noon." So the man did as Joseph commanded, and brought the men to Joseph's house. When the brothers saw they were being brought to Joseph's home, they were terrified. "He must have brought us here because of the money we found in our sacks the first time we were in Egypt," they said. "No doubt he plans to pretend that we stole it, and then he'll seize us, make us his slaves, and take away our donkeys." So they approached the steward at the front door and explained, "Sir, we originally came here to buy food, but when we stopped at the inn and opened our bags, we found that the money we had used to buy the grain was in the top of them. So we have brought it back with us. Here it is. We have also brought more money to buy food. Truly, we have no idea who put the money back in our sacks." "Don't worry," the steward reassured them. "Be at peace. Your God and the God of your father must have placed this treasure in your bags, for I know I received your payments." Then he brought Simeon out to them, and the steward brought the 10 brothers into Joseph's house. He gave them water to wash their feet, and gave their donkeys food to eat. Then the brothers prepared their gifts for Joseph, who was due to arrive at noon, for they heard they would be eating with him. When Joseph arrived at last, they presented their gifts to him and bowed down to the ground. Joseph greeted them and asked, "Is your old father well, of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" "Yes," they replied, "your servant our father is in good health and is alive and well." And they bowed down to the ground yet again. When Joseph looked up, he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and asked, "Is this your younger brother, the one you told me about?" Then he blessed him and said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph rushed out of the room because he was overwhelmed with emotion at seeing his brother, and he looked for a place to weep by himself. So he entered his bedchamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and barely controlling his emotions, he said, "Let the meal be served." So the men served Joseph at his own table and his brothers at a separate one. And the Egyptians who ate with Joseph also sat at their own table, because Egyptians despise Hebrews and refuse to eat with them. Now Joseph's brothers were seated in the order of their birth, from the firstborn all the way down to the youngest. And the men looked at each other in astonishment. During the meal, Joseph sent portions of food to his brothers from his own table, but he gave Benjamin 5 times as much as the others. So the brothers feasted and drank freely and celebrated with him. In Genesis chapter 44, Joseph commanded his steward and said, "Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and place each man's money in the mouths of their bags. Then put my silver cup in the youngest sack, along with his grain money. and his steward did exactly as Joseph had commanded. At the break of dawn, the men headed out with their donkeys loaded down with grain. But no sooner had they left the city that Joseph sent his steward chasing after them. "Catch up with them," he instructed, "and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Is this not the cup from which my Lord drinks, and which he uses for divination? You have done wickedly.'" So the steward caught up with them and repeated these exact words. But the brothers protested. "Why would my Lord say such words? God forbid that your servant should do such a thing. We even brought the money back we found in our sacks. How could we possibly steal silver or gold from your master's house? If you find his cup with any one of us, let that man die, and the rest of us will become your slaves." "Very well," the steward agreed, "but only the one who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go free." So the men quickly placed each of their sacks on the ground and opened them. The steward searched through the bags, starting with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And lo and behold, he found the cup in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers saw this, they tore their clothes in distress. Then each man loaded his donkey and quickly returned to the city. Judah and his brothers arrived at Joseph's house, and they fell to the ground before him. "What have you done?" Joseph said angrily. "Do you not realize that a man such as I can easily divine the truth?" "What can we say to my lord?" Judah said. "How can we explain ourselves, or how can we prove our innocence? Surely God is punishing us for our sins. My lord, we have all returned to be your slaves. All of us, not just the one who had the cup." "No," Joseph said. "God forbid that I should do such a thing. Only the man who stole my cup will become my slave. The rest of you may return to your father in peace." Then Judah stepped forward and pleaded with him. "Please, my lord, let your servant speak to you privately, and don't be angry with your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. My lord asked us if we had a father or a brother, and we told my lord that we do have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His full brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him deeply. Then you said to us, 'Bring him down to me so I can see him.' But we explained to my lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for his father would die from the grief. But you told us, 'Unless your youngest brother comes with you, you will not see my face again.' So we returned to our father and told him what you said. Later, when our father said, 'Go back again and buy us more food,' we replied, 'We cannot go down without our youngest brother. We will only go if our youngest brother is with us, for we cannot see the man's face without him.' Then my father said, 'You know my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them left and never returned. No doubt he was torn in pieces by some wild animal, and I haven't seen him since. Now, if you take this younger one from me as well, and any harm comes to him, you will bring my gray hairs down to the grave in sorrow. And now, my lord, I cannot go back to my father without the boy, seeing as his life is bound up in the boy's life. And if he sees that the young man is not with us, he will die, and your servants will bring the gray hairs of our father down to the grave in sorrow. So please, my lord, let me stay here as a slave in place of the young man, and let him go back with his brothers. For how can I possibly return to my father if the boy is not with me? I could not bear to see the anguish this thing would cause my father." Genesis chapter 45. At Judah's words, Joseph couldn't contain his emotions any longer, and he commanded his attendants, "Out, everyone, leave me." So Joseph was alone when he revealed himself to his brothers. Then he broke down and cried, and he wept so loudly the Egyptians heard him, and word of it was quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless, and they were stunned at his presence. "Please, come closer to me," Joseph said. So they came closer, And Joseph said once again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But don't be upset or angry with yourselves. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to save people's lives and to preserve our family. For this famine has ravaged the land for 2 years, and yet there are 5 more years in which there will be no plowing and harvesting. That is why God sent me to Egypt ahead of you, to keep you and your families alive and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So it wasn't you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Now hurry, go to my father and tell him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord over all of Egypt. Come to me, don't wait. You will live in the land of Goshen, close to me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and everything you have. And there I will take care of you, for there are still 5 more years of famine. Otherwise you and your household will come to poverty. Look, Joseph added, you can see with your own eyes, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it's really me speaking to you. So go, tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt and of everything that you've seen. Hurry and bring him here. Then Joseph hugged Benjamin, and he wept, and Benjamin cried as well. Then Joseph kissed all of his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers talked with him. The news that Joseph's brothers had arrived rapidly spread throughout Pharaoh's house. Joseph's brothers have come, they said, and it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. Pharaoh called for Joseph and said to him, Tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and hurry back to the land of Canaan. Then get your father and your families and return to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the finest produce of the land. Yes, tell your brothers, take wagons from the land of Egypt to carry your little children and your wives, and bring your father here. Don't worry about your personal possessions, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So the sons of Israel did as they were told, and Joseph gave them wagons and supplies for their journey. Then he gave each of them a new set of clothes. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 sets of clothes. He also sent his father 10 male donkeys loaded with the best products of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father on his journey. So Joseph sent his brothers away, and as they left, he said to them, See that you don't quarrel on the way. So the 10 brothers left Egypt and returned to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. And they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. When Jacob heard this, he was stunned, and his heart almost stopped beating, because he didn't believe them. But when they had repeated all of Joseph's words, and he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, Jacob's spirit revived. It must be true, Jacob exclaimed. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So in Genesis chapter 46, Israel set out for Egypt with all of his possessions. But he stopped at Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. That night God spoke to Israel in a vision and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he replied, Here am I. I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I will go down with you into Egypt, and I will also surely bring your offspring up again. You will die there, but Joseph will be with you to close your eyes. So Jacob left Beersheba, and his sons carried him and their children and their wives down to Egypt in the wagons that Pharaoh had provided. They also took all their livestock and everything they had acquired in the land of Canaan. So Jacob and his entire family traveled down to Egypt, his sons and grandsons, daughters and granddaughters, all of his descendants. Now Jacob had 12 sons, and his firstborn son Reuben had 4 sons. Simeon had 6, Levi had 3, and Judah had 5 sons and 2 grandsons. But 2 of his sons, and Onan,
died in Canaan. Issachar had 4 sons, and Zebulun had 3. So the total number of Jacob's descendants through Leah, including Dinah his daughter, was 33. Now Zilpah, Jacob's handmaid, had 16 offspring altogether, for Gad had 7 sons, Asher had 4 sons, and a daughter named Sarah, and 2 grandsons. Rachel, of course, gave birth to Joseph and Benjamin, and Joseph had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, whose mother was Asenath, while Benjamin had 10 sons, so Rachel's offspring totaled 14. As for Bilhah, her son Dan had 1 son, and Naphtali had 4 sons, so she had 7 offspring in total for Jacob. Altogether, the total number of Jacob's direct descendants who traveled with him to Egypt, not counting his sons' wives, was 66. And if we include Jacob, Joseph, and his 2 children, the total number of Jacob's family members in Egypt was 70. Now Israel sent Judah ahead of him to meet up with Joseph and get directions to the region of Goshen. After they arrived, Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to Goshen to meet his father. When they met, he embraced his father Jacob, fell on his neck, and wept for a long time. Then Israel said to his son, "Now let me die in peace, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph said, "I will go and tell Pharaoh that my brothers and my father's household who lived in the land of Canaan have come to me, and I will tell him they are shepherds, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and everything they have. So when Pharaoh calls for you and asks about your occupation, you must tell him, 'Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth even until now, both we and our fathers.' That way, when you tell him this, he'll let you live here in the land of Goshen, for the Egyptians despise shepherds." In Genesis chapter 47, verses 1 to 12, Joseph went and told Pharaoh, "My father and brothers have come from the land of Canaan, along with their flocks and herds, and now they are in the land of Goshen." Then he took 5 of his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. "What is your occupation?" the Pharaoh asked them. "Your servants are shepherds," the brothers answered, "both we and our brothers, and we have come to live here in Egypt for a while, because there is no pasture for our flocks in Canaan, for the famine is very severe there. So please, let your servants live in the region of Goshen." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Now that your father and brothers have come to you, you may choose any place in the land of Egypt for them to live. Settle your family in the best of the land. Let them live in the region of Goshen. And if any of them are specially skilled, place them in charge of my livestock as well." Afterwards, Joseph brought Jacob, his father, and presented him to Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh asked him, "How old are you?" "The years of my pilgrimage are 130, Jacob said. "Few and evil have been the years of my life, and they have not reached the years that my fathers lived during the days of their pilgrimage." Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and left his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them property in the best part of the land of Egypt, in the region of Ramesses, also known as Goshen, as Pharaoh had commanded. Joseph also provided for his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their children. Genesis chapter 47, verses 13 to 31. Now there was no bread left in the land, because the famine was so severe, and the people of Egypt and Canaan were starving. And Joseph collected all the money found in Egypt and Canaan, as the people came and bought grain from him. Then Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. But when the money was gone in the land of Egypt and Canaan, the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your very eyes? For our money is gone." "Give me your livestock," Joseph said, "and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, since the money is gone." So they brought their animals to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for their horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys, and he gave them grain in exchange for all their livestock for that year. But when that year ended, they came to him the next year and said,
We will not hide from my lord that our money is gone, and my lord also has our herds of livestock. Now there is nothing left except for our bodies and our lands. But why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We offer ourselves and our property as servants for Pharaoh. Just give us grain so we may live and not die, and so the land does not become desolate and empty." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was so severe, and all the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he moved them to cities from one end of Egypt's borders to the other. The only land he didn't buy was the priests, because they received an allotment of food directly from Pharaoh, so they didn't need to sell their property. Then Joseph said to the people, "Look, I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh. Here is seed for you, so you can plant the fields. And at the time of harvest, you must give 1/5 of your crop to Pharaoh. The remaining 4/5 will be your own for seed for your fields, and food for you, for your households, and your little ones." "You have saved our lives," the people said in gratitude. "May we find favor in the sight of my lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." So Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown on his land. Only the land of the priest did not become Pharaoh's. Meanwhile, Israel and his family lived in the land of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They bought property there, were fruitful, and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 more years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me with my ancestors." "I will do as you have said," Joseph promised. "Swear to me," Jacob insisted. So Joseph swore to his father, and Israel bowed humbly at the head of his bed. In Genesis chapter 48, after some time had passed, someone told Joseph, "Your father is sick." So Joseph took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and visited his father Jacob. When Joseph arrived, Jacob was told, "Look, your son Joseph has come to see you." So Israel strengthened himself and sat up on his bed. Then Jacob said to his son, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, saying, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you. I will make you a multitude of people, and I will give this land to your descendants as an everlasting possession.' Now your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you, are mine. I claim them as my sons, just as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. But any children born to you in the future will be your own, and they will inherit land within the territories of their brothers Ephraim and Manasseh. Long ago, when I came from Paddan Aram, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the journey, while there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem." Then Israel looked at Joseph's 2 sons and said, "Who are these?" "These are my sons," Joseph replied, "whom God has given me here in Egypt." "Please bring them closer, so that I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were dim from old age, so that he could hardly see. Then Joseph brought his sons close to him, and their grandfather kissed and embraced them. Then Israel said to Joseph, "I had not thought to see your face, and look, God has shown me your offspring as well." Joseph moved the boys away from their grandfather and bowed with his face to the ground. Then Joseph positioned his 2 boys in front of his father. He placed Ephraim at Israel's left hand and Manasseh toward Israel's right hand. But Jacob intentionally crossed his arms as he reached out to lay his hands on the boys' heads. He placed his right hand on
Ephraim's head, although he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, although Manasseh was the firstborn. Then Jacob blessed Joseph and said, May the God before whom my grandfather Abraham and my father Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd and fed and cared for me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless these boys. May they preserve my name and the names of Abraham and Isaac, and may their descendants grow into a great multitude throughout the earth. But Joseph was upset when he saw that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head. So Joseph grabbed his father's hand and lifted it to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Not so, my father, Joseph protested, for this is the firstborn. Place your right hand on Manasseh's head. But his father refused. I know, my son, I know. Manasseh also will become a people, and he also will be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than him, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations. So Jacob blessed the boys that day and said, By you Israel will pronounce a blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. In this way, Jacob placed Ephraim ahead of his older brother Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, Look, I am about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers, to Canaan. Moreover, I am giving you one portion more than your brothers from the land that I took from the control of the Amorites in battle with my sword and with my bow. Genesis chapter 49. Jacob called for his sons, and when they arrived, he said to them, Gather around me so that I may tell you what will happen to you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. You excel in rank and in power. But you are unstable as raging water, and you will be first no longer, because you went up to your father's bed and defiled my couch. Simeon and Levi, you are two of a kind. Your swords are weapons of violence and revenge. O my soul, may I never join in their secret counsel or know of their wicked plans. For in their anger they murdered men, and for sport they crippled oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will scatter them among Jacob's descendants, and I will divide them throughout the land of Israel. Judah, you are the one your brothers will praise. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies, and your father's sons will bow down before you. For you, my son, are like a young lion that has finished eating its prey, like a lion that crouches and lies down, and as an old lion, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh the Messiah comes, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Tying his foal to the grapevine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washes his clothing in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun will dwell by the seashore, and be a haven of ships. His border will be unto Sidon. Issachar is like a strong donkey, resting between two burdens. When he saw that the resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant, he bent down his shoulders, picked up his burdens, and submitted himself to hard labor. Dan will judge his people as one of Israel's tribes. Dan will be a poisonous snake beside the road, an adder in the path that bites the horse's heels so that his rider is thrown off. I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. As for Gad, a raiding troop will overcome him, but he will overcome at the last. Asher's food will be rich and bountiful, and he will produce food fit for royalty.
Naphtali is a doe let loose, a swift warrior, he giveth goodly words. Joseph is a fruitful branch, even a fruitful branch by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly attacked him, and shot at him, and harassed him. But his bow remained steady, for his arms were strengthened by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the shepherd, the rock of Israel, by the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who keeps on blessing you with the blessings of the heaven above, and the blessings of the watery depths below, and blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have surpassed the blessings of my ancestors, reaching up to the heights of the everlasting hills. These blessings will rest on the head of Joseph, even on the crown of the head of him who is prince among his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours his prey, and at night he divides the spoil. These are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them as he blessed them. Then Jacob said to his sons, Soon I will die and join my ancestors. You must bury me with my father and grandfather in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave in the field at Machpelah, east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, that Abraham bought from the children of Heth to use as a burial site. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried Leah. And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and joined his ancestors in death. In Genesis chapter 50, Joseph threw himself on his father, wept over him, and kissed him. Then he ordered the physicians who served him to embalm Jacob. So they embalmed Joseph's father, which took 40 days, and the Egyptians mourned his death for 70 days. After the days of mourning were over, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household and said, If I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh and say, My father made me swear an oath, saying, Listen, I am about to die. Take my body back to the land of Canaan, and bury me in the tomb which I prepared for myself in the land of Canaan. So please, let me go and bury my father, Joseph said. Then I will return. When Pharaoh heard Joseph's request, he said, Go and bury your father, as he made you promise. So Joseph left Egypt to bury Jacob his father, accompanied by all of Pharaoh's servants, all of Egypt's elders, all of Joseph's household, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their little ones, their flocks, and their herds stayed behind in the land of Goshen. A great number of chariots and horsemen also went with Joseph, so there was a large crowd of people. When they arrived at the threshing floor of Atad, near the Jordan River, they loudly wept and greatly mourned for 7 days with a great lamentation. And when the local people who lived there, the Canaanites, saw them weeping, they said, This is a place of deep mourning for these Egyptians. So they renamed that place Abel Mizraim, which means mourning of Egypt. So Jacob's sons did as their father had commanded them. They carried his body to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah. Afterwards, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all those who had gone with him to bury his father. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became very fearful. What if Joseph carries a grudge against us and decides to pay us back for all the evil we did to him? So they sent a message to Joseph saying, Your father commanded us before he died and said, You are to say to Joseph, Please forgive your brothers' wrongdoings and their sins, for they have done evil to you. And now we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you, please forgive us of our sin. When Joseph heard his brothers' words, he broke down and cried. Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before him. Look, we are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me,
But God meant it for good, to bring this about so that many lives would be saved. So don't fear. I will take care of you and nourish you and your little ones." Thus Joseph comforted his brothers and spoke kindly to them. Now Joseph continued to live in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived to be 110 years old. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's children, as well as the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, who Joseph claimed as his own. At the end of his life, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this place and lead you back to the land which he promised to give to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath and said, "God will surely lead you out of Egypt, and when that happens, you must take my bones with you." So Joseph died at 110 years old, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt.